One day were Zelda in the forest by herself to practice some new spells. She had recently got herself a new book of spells from a bookstore in the town near her castle. She is always eager to learn new spells every single time. But this time she had recently got a book that contained some very old spells. She had read through all of them, but decided to try at least one that seems to be working with some sort of teleportation spell. But she was not really sure how far the spell could take her. But after she clearly, carefully had read through all the words, just in case if she were read there something wrong, which she didn't want to do. After she had read the same connotation for the spell like 10 times before actually performing the spell, she was confident she had actually managed to read and could cast the spell just in case. She continued to keep her book with her and perform the spell. As she didn't know exactly how far the spell could transport her. Maybe they were only as maybe as 6 or 7 feet, or maybe just 1 feet, or maybe 1 mile away. Because it didn't even mention exactly how far this spell will take it. But as she used the spell, a bright light appeared and she was blinded. And the next moment when she wakes up, she is in a strange alleyway with some buildings. She believes maybe that she ended up back in town somewhere. And but just before she about to leave the alley, she hears some strange sounds. A lot of people, but something else. As she carefully walks out from the alley and sees that she is in fact in a city, but not in her city. And it was a completely different city that she has ever seen before. There were people, but they were not dressed as her, and there was strange things run, moving on the streets. She has never seen anything like it. And even those buildings were not the same designs back home. She wonders, where has she ended up with? And even though she decided to keep herself in the alley just because she didn't want to draw any attention to any of those people on the street. So she managed to keep herself hidden. Even though that despite she didn't want to know for sure where she ended up with. After the things, she had no idea if she would be alone or she wanted to know for some certain where she ended up. After that, she had been in the alley, waited for a moment to sneak out on the street without being noticed. She managed to do so, and no one seems to be even noticed her that sneaking around the corner and the next corner and the next. Suddenly, she ended very close to this park, where she sat down under some trees and tried to figure out what happened and why did she end up in this particular city and why is it such a strange place compared to her own home? And where is this city even located? She had been around in her kingdom Hyrule so many times, but never has seen anything like this, and especially has never seen anything like those strange things on the streets that are moving without horses, for most of all. She had never seen anything like it. She believes maybe these magical things. Maybe they are used by some sort of magic spell or magical items that makes them possible for them to moving by themselves without any horses. But there were even some things about this place that she was curious to know more about. Before she decided to return back home, she decided to stay there for about only a few hours to do some more exploration in the area and maybe figure out exactly where she ended up with. And after she had to look around in the vicinity close to the park, she managed to find out she indeed had been traveled to a different city, but even so far as she can see, to a different kingdom. Or as she believed anyways. But she managed to sneak back to the park and open a book which which she still had was painful. She even looked for the spell and read it once again, but nothing happened. She tried again and again and again. She tried so many times, almost like 10 times, for the same words of the incantation spell, but nothing worked. Maybe she believed maybe this spell can only work one time per day. So she decided to wait till but early next morning, but then it came to her where to stay. She had no idea where to stay though, because this place was like so strange worldly to her. She had no friends, no basic understanding where to stay. But there was one other thing. She had no idea what kind of currency they were using in this city. And unless if it's not in this kingdom, it's not part of her own, of Kingdom of Hyrule. If this is a separate kingdom, they may use a different currency, and may hers may not even work. But there was only one risk she could have do. Either find some place warm overnight or sleeping in the park, which could be cold because who knows. But she managed to find at least one place just closer to the park, some abandoned building where she managed to at least find some place to sleep. Even though it was a bit uncomfortable, but at least she had some roof over her head, unless it would be cold and rain that night. But she had not much to eat. But luckily, she found that she had a small bag with her that contained some some other bread she usually eat, and likely enough for that they would give her some food for the night though. But even if she lays on her makeshift bed, she was curious to herself, where am I? And how did I end up here in the first place? I mean, she was very not even sure how this spell even worked. Maybe she believed thought to herself, maybe that she shouldn't have been even used or even performed the spell in the first place. But then she fell asleep. By early next morning, Zelda went back to the park to see if she could find a spot more secluded where she could perform the spell once again. She tried it at least 3 times, but no work at all. She was both getting a little bit bored and worried about this time. She had no idea exactly what to do. Since the spell doesn't even want to work, and she was getting worried. If the spell doesn't even want to work, how would she even get back to her own kingdom? Because as she had to ask herself, and she had no idea how far she is from King of Hyrule, from the place where she is now. Maybe it's in another neighbor kingdom, so she looked around to maybe find if there was any place that she could find some maps. And including though, she managed to find was a public library. She managed to sneak in and find a part where they have maps of the city and of the world. And as she looked on the map of the world, it was not like her own world. She realized at the moment then she was no longer in her world. She had been hearing stories about other realms that could be accessed by some sort of spells. But those spells has been lost for centuries. No one has even found part, any portal, or any of those spells have forgotten. No one that even remember. And she remembers her book. What if That spell or part was actually one of those spells that could open a portal. But why would it even not work back home? If there was only maybe that she realized, what if this spell is only one way ticket? That it's only working in one direction. But what if this couldn't work for others? But that was one thing she would not take a risk though. Because if she were not willing to try to ask someone randomly to read this, perform this spell, and see if they can end up transport to their home kingdom. Well, if that happens, she would have something explaining to do to the people in this world, and she probably would have to ask herself, if that person can go back to her home kingdom, that would mean she is trapped in this particular kingdom. But it was one way thing that she started to wonder, will she ever return home? And after she knew the truth, she was trapped in this realm of this different world that she is in. She started to cry, and she fell to the ground on her knees and started crying more and more. Then, suddenly, a young woman walked up to her, asked if she was okay. Stella looks up and looks at this woman and shook her head and said, no, she is lost and she doesn't know how to get back home. Even though this young woman was a little bit puzzled to hearing that. After all, this is quite a big city. Maybe that she is new here and doesn't even know how to find her place. She asked her address, but Stella explained that she doesn't even know. She doesn't haven't had an address in this city. And she asked if she was homeless. Stella was silent for a moment. She realized, should she even telling the truth to this young woman, or made up some lie to her? And but the only thing is, she was kind of homeless, since she couldn't go back home. So she said yes. And though the young woman told her she owned a small hotel or a small inn in the city, and offered her that she could stay there for one night, to see if she could stay there unless she had any something to pay. Zelda did actually had a small bag with her that contained some gold and silver coins from her own kingdom, but she knew that those were probably not even worth a thing in this realm. But what she didn't know, gold and silver was still very highly priced in this world also. And she said that she had some money, but she wasn't even not sure if they were enough for her to pay. So they went back to the hotel. Even on the way, though, the young woman introduced herself as Miya Asama, and she explained that she owned this small inn, and even though the price is quite expensive, but there are always people that manage to stay there for some time. Even though Zelda was silent for most of the time, she only said her name was Zelda. She even asked where she's from, but Zelda didn't tell. She didn't know exactly how to explain that she's from a different realm, or exactly how she ended up in this place, and that she just said she doesn't even remember exactly how she ended up in the city because she was traveling, and she had been traveling a lot, and she doesn't even remember most place because she doesn't stay in one place that particularly long, and she's continued walking or traveling. And Maya actually took this as an example and even believed her. And even at the small inn, Maya actually asked Zelda if she could pay some of the money for now and how long she could stay there. So even though Maya had no idea about the kingdom where she's from, she paid with some at least with some of the coins she had and looked at them and realized she tells the truth. She has traveling a lot because these coins is not the same as the kingdom or this country where she's staying. But as long as they were real gold and silver, she will allow to stay there. At least two gold coins was enough for her to allow to stay there for a whole week. Apparently, they were enough that. Maya did show Zelda a room where she could stay. She even gave her some new clothes for as as a as a sign of generosity, and she accepted them. But the most dread that day, though, Zelda didn't even leave the room she was staying in. She was curious to know more about this place, but even now she realized she cannot go back home, and she was stuck here. She wanted to go back though, but she couldn't. That same evening, Maya came to Zelda's room with some plate with food. If the, she probably thought that Zelda was hungry since she hadn't even come down yet, and she opened the door and thanked her and closed it again. Even that night, though, Zelda laid awake in the bed and thought to herself, now she's trapped in this world. What was she to do? It's not like she will just pack her bag and go somewhere else to find to live, because she's she is a royalty, a princess, but she had no idea what to do then. But the next day, Maya actually had talked to Zelda, who sat in the lobby, still silent, since she had no idea what to do. She even asked her if she was good at something, maybe cooking, or maybe she could stay here. She would even offered Zelda a job at this inn. She said that she wasn't even good at cooking. She had never cooked in her life. That surprised Maya, but she actually then offered her a position as a waitress. And that is something that Zelda could do. And even though it took time for Zelda to get used to the life of a new as a simple waitress rather from a princess, but she kept most of her about her personal background a secret. Even from Maya, they have been close friends with now by now. And after about several months of living at this inn, Maya actually started being very good friends with Zelda. Even then, but after they had been knowing each other for at least a couple of months. After a couple of months, Zelda has still not even revealed anything about her true identity. She wondered to herself if she would even tell Maya about this, or if she would even believe her, because maybe she would think that she's crazy and too crazy to let her stay in the inn and throw her outside on the street again. So she decided to keep it as a secret. But after Benny had again figured out about what to do, she overheard Maya talking with some other girls about the training as a secretary, and that same day, Zelda asked Maya, what is a secretary? And Maya explained that a secretary is an alien species that is a humanoid that came to Earth several years ago, and she is one of them. And now at least she knows that Maya is not wouldn't think she is crazy if she told the truth. They asked Maya if they could sit down somewhere with some private. She had something to tell her. So they went to this small lobby in the backyard where they sat down. At first, Zelda was silent. After several minutes, she had explained all the details, who she is and where she's from, and how she ended up in this place. She was expecting that Maya would even believe her. Maybe say, "Oh, that's nice," or something like that. But since Maya herself is an alien from a different planet, so maybe they would have something in common. And even though that Maya first heard the story, she actually looked at Zelda, wondered if she was telling the truth or was lying. But she could sense and even see inside in Zelda's eyes. She was in fact telling the truth all along. And even though that Zelda had even explained that she's trapped here and that she can never return back to her own kingdom, she had tried the spell several times. Then Maya asked if she could try the spell. But even though the Maya was knew that maybe it wouldn't even work, but even Zelda, She tried to convince Maya not to try it. Perhaps even if it would work, she would end up in her kingdom, and perhaps even not and not and maybe not be able to go back to this world again. But Maya said it's worth the risk to take. So she read down the paper, the spell, and Maya read it twice, but nothing happened. So it turned out maybe this spell doesn't even work for anyone else in this world. Maybe because there isn't any magic. That was something that Zelda didn't really come up with or realize. Maybe this require magic. And since there aren't any magic in this world, so what if the spell doesn't even work because there are not any magic in this world? Maybe that's the reason why that spell doesn't even work for Zelda earlier, and not for even for Maya. So after coming realization to this, she was really stuck in this world. But now she has at least someone who believes her, and she has a good friend, and even a place to stay, and a work that she could pay, and continue to live at this place for half of the price that she earned. But even despite having all of this, Zelda wanted to go back home. But despite knowing that it was impossible for her to even go back home. But there was something about this place though. She wanted to be able to go back. But now she knows that it's impossible. In after not a few weeks after that, Zelda had revealed her true secrets to Maya. Maya actually was getting more closer to Zelda. And even after when they didn't have any work, they often spent time in either the backyard, just talking, or they walked around in town to just spending time, hanging out, and even do some window shopping or like that. After some time, Zelda had revealed her secrets to some of Maya's closest friends, who some of them actually lived at the inn. Even though they actually believed her because Maya revealed they were actually she was telling the truth, since they all were also the same species as Maya. So there were not any point for them to be. They was no anything they had no idea for no reason that they had no believe. They believed that Zelda had no reason to lie to them because if they had even told her about their aliens, and they probably if she had told them about that, if they were just regular humans, they wouldn't even believe her at all. But since they are aliens, they had to believe her. But even though that they also came closer, but it was only one that Zelda felt more closer to anyone else. It was in fact Maya. Even though she looked up to Maya. But after Barna had been living in this world for a whole year by the time, she started to fall in love with Maya. But she had no idea if this was going to work because they're just good friends, and she didn't know if she would even want to tell Maya about her true feelings. Even some of her Maya's friends were actually aware of Zelda's feelings for Maya. They tried to convince her maybe it was best to tell her how she feels. But Zelda, she was not even convinced not to do so, so she didn't. It took another 2 to 3 weeks before she came up with this. Maybe it was best to tell Zelda, Maya, how she feels. Because if she didn't, who knows what would have happened? Maybe Maya would have found someone else to be with, and her own had lost her only chance of telling Maya how she really feels for her. But one day, when Zelda was going to tell Maya, Zelda decided to take a small walk in town just to be clear in her mind and try to figure out how to tell Maya. As she was walking across the street, she was in a deep thought and she didn't even hear the honking horn of a car was approaching and hit her, and she flew onto the hood of the car and on the street unconscious. She was unconscious on the street. But luckily for Maya, who was actually in town just looking for her, when she didn't find her back home, back at the inn, she saw the whole thing happen. She was terrified, and she was quickly taken to the hospital where she got treatment. And luckily enough, she had not any serious injuries. Only a few broken ribs and a concussion and a broken arm, but that was the only thing she had. If it was any worse, she would have lost her. It was then, seldom one after she woke up in the hospital, when she told Maya how she felt for her. Even though that she even said that, even though Maya that even loved her back the same way, she would understand. But Maya took her hand and moved and put it on Zelda's cheek and made her look in her and actually kissed her. And she whispered, I don't care. I love you too, Zelda. And that made both realize they were in such deep in love with each other. And it was this a sign for Zelda for this car accident to meant to happen, so that she could tell Maya how she felt. Even despite that could have killed her, but somehow she feels in her heart that maybe it was meant for the car to hit her. After that, they both realized the feelings and they actually start dating. Even their friends was well surprised though at first, but they were actually very supportive. They actually was just happy to see that Maya had found someone to be with. It happened though that sometimes they didn't even speak each other because they didn't argue, but because they were quite a lot of busy with keeping the inn in a clean state, and that Maya sometimes trained with some of her friends and like that. But after they've been dating for about 2 years, Maya and Zelda actually decided to take the next level. And Maya, she actually proposed to Zelda at the park where she found her the first day. They actually had a small wedding at the inn, and it was just a great time. Even though they didn't went any far away from the honeymoon, they actually spent it in the inn. After they had been married for about 3 years, they wanted to have a family of their own though. But since they were couldn't be pregnant for since they were both girls, which they both laugh about, so they decided to maybe adopt a family from children from a local orphanage, which there was one in town, and they actually adopted twin daughters, sisters, and they were actually 10 years old, and they loved the family. But just only 2 years later, they actually adopted two more children, a brother and a sister. The brother was about 8, and the daughter was about 5. They actually had a great time with the family. Even Zelda was never actually expecting to be a mother to 4 children at any sort of point, but she was just happy to be able to be married with someone like Maya. Maya, though, she had the same feeling because her feelings, her love, her passion for Zelda was so beyond anything. Even Zelda, her dreams, her hopes, her love were towards Maya, it couldn't even be described for in her mind. It was so strong, so pure of passion. She loved her more than anything in the whole world. Even to have a family of 4 children with Maya was the one thing she wished actually would happen. Because she remembered all those years ago when she met Maya at the park for the first time. If she had even known that Maya would be her future wife, or perhaps even met her at the park, she would have missed out all this pure happiness of this joy with their wife and their children together. They really love each other so, so deeply. even they had no idea they were meant to be with each other. And this is how Twilight Zelda and Maya Asama found a true love, got a big family. The end.